Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on day 3 of the Smithsonian Affiliations virtual conference. We're about ready to start an exciting session called In Plain Words, Best Practices for Interpreting Writing and Exhibitions. I'm Aaron Glavis. I'm a National Outreach Manager with Smithsonian Affiliations. As we get started, I want to recognize that I'm speaking to you today from the ancestral homeland of the Paspahegh and Kiskiak and the nearby Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where we would normally gather. This is the traditional territory of the Nacotchtank and Anacostan, and I extend my respect and honor these indigenous communities who have lived here since time immemorial. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. This session is being recorded. It'll be available in the on-demand catalog in the attendee hub shortly after this session ends. Closed captioning is available. If you have questions, please use the Q&A icon to the right of your screen in the attendee hub. Please feel free to use the chat for on-topic discussion during the session. While we encourage lively discussion, we ask that you express yourself in a civil manner and treat others with respect. The Smithsonian monitors comments and may remove participants from the program in accordance with its terms of use. A link of the terms of use is in the chat for your reference. And finally, we hope you will take a moment to complete a short survey at the end of the session. You can find that link to the survey in the attendee hub. Your feedback directly informs decisions we make about future conferences and opportunities. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Angela Roberts-Reeder, Supervisory Exhibits Writer and Editor from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Leslie Poster, Supervisory Writer, Editor, Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and Julie Tass, Editor, Writer, Exhibits Design Department, Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. And I will turn it over to Angela to begin the discussion.
I am muted. Story of my life. Thank you, Aaron, for those introductions. And welcome everybody for joining us here today. Judy, Leslie, and I are really excited to be able to talk to you all about interpretive writing for exhibitions, and also to introduce to you kind of our baby that we've been working on for the last couple of years. And I'm going to share my screen now, if I'm successful with that. Let's see. Can you all see that's my screen? Okay, well, I'm going to assume that you can. So this is our baby we've been working on. It's the new Smithsonian Institution's Guide to Interpretive Writing for Exhibitions. And I've posted here a few links of where you can find this online. If you are internal to the Smithsonian, you can always grab it off of the Undersecretary for Museum and Culture's PRISM page. But if you're outside the Smithsonian, or if you're sharing it with folks who are outside Smithsonian, I would recommend using that second link, the exhibits.si.edu/resources. That's probably the best way to get that. And so what we want to do today is we want to talk about a little bit about how this came to be, and then also talk about like what's in it, how you can use it, and some of our favorite tips. So without further ado, if I'm lucky, there we go. So first of all, I just want to say, like, what is this guide? This guide is really developed to be a playbook for your team to really think about how are some of the ways that you can best engage your visitors. It's also developed for people who maybe don't do exhibition writing as the primary part of their job, or they're new to this. And they're like, what the heck do I do? How do I write an exhibit that's going to be engaging? So it's really meant to be a toolkit and a series of best practices for folks who are doing this kind of work in their museums. Now, what this guide is not is not the definitive last word statement on exhibition writing. It is not a set of rules that you have to follow. It is not, anything that's decreed from on high. It is really, a bunch of exhibit writers, editors, and developers who wanted to have a conversation and share with the community some of the things that we've picked up over the years. And we've written it in kind of that spirit. So who was involved in developing this was a core development team of 8 writers, editors, and exhibit developers from the Natural History Museum, Air and Space, American History, Smithsonian Exhibits, and I'm sure that I'm missing somebody here because I said 5 units, and whoever it is I'm missing is going to probably, grimace at me. We also worked with some folks with the Freer Sackler as well, now that I'm remembering. The first draft was reviewed by 24 of our colleagues from 16 of our Smithsonian units and from 2 outside museums. We're launching it now, hoping that with a broader audience, we'll get some feedback from you all, our affiliations, who can tell us, like, is this useful? Is this not useful? What are some things that we might want to look at in, future revisions of this? And this really started as a grassroots project. So we were really excited when it was endorsed by the Secretary and the Undersecretary of Museums and Culture. So how did this come about? Back in the fall of 2018, a group of us offered a workshop on exhibition writing for a group called PEEPS. I can't remember exactly what PEEPS stands for, but it's for exhibit professionals within the Smithsonian. And so we were talking to, curators, exhibit developers, designers, writers, people who get pulled into working on exhibits, talking to them about writing. At that workshop, it became really clear to us that people wanted some guidance. They wanted, like, what are the best practices? What are some guidelines? How do I do this? And so from that workshop, the folks who presented at that workshop and then pulled a couple of other people in, we started meeting in spring of 2019, kind of on the down low, talking about what was going to be like, what was going to be in the outline, what did we want to cover. We started drafting it and editing it. And all of this was like in between the regular projects that we do. So none of us were tasked with doing this. We were just like, we wanted to do it. So we were working on that in 2019, 2020, the pandemic hit, but we were still meeting on Zoom and Teams. We got some reviews and editing. And this year we were looking at, the design. So taking it from a Word document to something that actually looked decent. And actually, this is the first public launching of this document. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie.
Hello there. Thanks for joining us. We found in this process that there were challenges, of course, that we found to be opportunities, actually, and certainly rewards in creating this guide. So let's talk a little bit about the rewards part first. We're one Smithsonian. That's the task that's been put to us as all of these museums and these units. This project offered us a unique opportunity to get together and to share the best of what we're doing at each of our individual units. And considering that we are several units, several museums, there's a lot of expertise that we can draw from, and we benefited greatly from our work together. Another reward is that just this feeling that you're not alone, we're not alone. When I started at the National Museum of American History, I was an office of one, and I didn't have a predecessor that I could go to ask questions, and it felt very isolating to do my work like that, and it felt uncertain. And I know that there are folks at other museums who do feel that sense of isolation. But this guide is going to give so many writers and editors the comfort of knowing that they're on the right track. And if they're not on the right track, this is going to give them a little bit of guidance to put them on the right track when they feel lost. And I hope that you all get a chance to click on those links that have been shared in the chat, take a look at the guide, and especially look at those names and email addresses, because those are all resources to you. We're so ready to reach out and help. And we hope that people do reach out and chat with us about interpretive writing, not just folks at the Smithsonian, but of course our friends at affiliate museums as well. And another reward I found in working on this guide is that it's not so scary, this task that we're doing. On the surface of it, it's scary. I know in American history, we get something like 3.5 million visitors a year pre-pandemic. That's kind of a lot when you realize that your task is to teach this audience, these folks who keep coming through the door. And you're doing all of that with the weight of the Smithsonian sunburst on your shoulders. But this guide can help with that. It gives you plays that you can run, techniques you can try, things you can watch for. It makes this Herculean task seem more manageable, more actionable. It's more like individual tasks that you can perform. And I think overall, one of the greatest rewards is just knowing that we can do amazing things together. In the years that I've been with the Smithsonian, we haven't had a guide like this. And it's just been incredible to see what can happen when people who are passionate about this work, passionate about the Smithsonian, take their own time to invest in a grassroots effort to help the Smithsonian and the museum field at large. And that's a great thing to be a part of. And of course, with any undertaking like this, there are going to be challenges. But I was really pleased and proud of the way that this team made those challenges into opportunities through the work on the guide. One thing that we were cognizant of is that we were going to get the question, who's the authority here? Like, who are you to say ... Who actually creates interpretive writing is very different, certainly at the Smithsonian from unit to unit. And I know at other museums, they have different writing and editing structures as well. And folks take that role very, very seriously. And sometimes it can get a little territorial. But we had this opportunity here to show how different specialists work on interpretive writing and can inform the creation of really good museum experiences. Another question we grappled with is, well, shouldn't each, all these museums are different. An Air and Space Museum isn't going to write in the same way as a Natural History Museum or the same way as an American History Museum. But what's nice about those big questions like that is that it gave us a chance to express who we are as the Smithsonian foundationally, and to say that interpretive writing is important to us, regardless of what individual museum we might be working for, that we know this way of writing works and reaches all of our audiences, regardless of the topic. And certainly a big question we knew we were going to get is like, why is this the right way? Why is this the best way to go about doing things? And I mean, that's a little bit of that who do you think you are kind of question. Because again, people are passionate about their work. I mean, nobody comes into the office and says, I'm so excited to do a bad job today. But a challenge can open up a conversation, If this isn't the right way, then what is? And why? I really do think that these contentious conversations can really be opportunities to talk about how to do the work better. And when we talk about what's right and what's wrong, in those moments we find out it more about what we share than the ways that we differ. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy.
Thanks, Leslie. So, both Angela and Leslie have told you a little bit about how we got to this point and the challenges and rewards of the guide. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about what's actually in this guide and how it might be able to help you. The guide itself has a goal. And if you take a look at the cartoon on the right side, which, I just really think is funny, showing two adults and a kid at the bottom of the steps that lead up to this great big old museum. And then the kid says, I'll go in and look at stuff, but I won't read any signage. And to me, that was really, just summing it up. Our goal here is that we want to write labels that visitors will read, especially some of our toughest visitors. So hopefully that's what this guide is going to help people with. It's really a guide, as was mentioned before, for just about anybody who works in exhibitions, from the curator to the designer to educators, anyone who does museum work. But it's especially meant for those people who are doing the actual writing, editing, reviewing, and even the approving of exhibit labels. Because it's to help, as Leslie said, this is a way to help you get along in case you are like me and are faced with like a blank page and need to quickly fill it up with something. What do you write? So anyway, there are practical tips in here, and these tips are based on a lot of the best practices in museum script writing that's out there already. So what the team did was, we came to consensus, this pan-institutional group that worked on it, and said, these are the ones that we want to include. And so you'll see that in a moment, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to recap, just to make sure we're clear, that this is a guide, but the very word of guide, it's not the rule book. As was said, it's like a playbook with lots of different strategies that you can try, shift around, maybe you change it up a little bit, whatever you think might be best for your museum. Because really that's the thing you need to remember, that you want to adapt ideas for your particular museum. Depending on who you are, how big you are, how small you are, how focused you are, you have different audiences, and you want to make sure that you're writing for that audience. Or maybe you even want to figure out a way to attract new audiences. So we're hoping that this is the guide that can help you there. Oh, next slide, please. So I'm just going to spend a little bit now talking about what's actually in this guide. Not going to delve too much into it. If you look at the table of contents, there's the foreword, the acknowledgements. Angela already talked about what is the guide and who's it for. I want to spend more time on the interpretive writing parts, those next few parts. So the first section here on what is interpretive writing, I think is really important because the section defines interpretive writing. And it's funny because I've talked to people in the museum world and someone will say to me, well, gee, I'm a historian. That's what I do. I interpret history. But that's not the kind of interpretation we're talking about. Interpretive writing is a very narrow type of writing that's just for museums. It's not like writing an academic journal. It's not even like writing a book where the reader can sit comfortably and go through pages or even stare at a paragraph a few times to reread it. We're talking about writing in a three-dimensional space in this museum where there's a lot of distractions going on. And so interpretive writing is writing that is clear, concise, and compelling. We've got to nab that visitor when we can, because there's so many other distractions. And speaking of visitors, that goes to the next point of why we want to use it, certainly to communicate. But the guide now has a section here where you take a look at, who is the visitor, and what do they want? Why are they coming here in the first place? What do they want to know? What do they already know? And so all these questions are answered looking at some of the museum theory on visitor behavior and visitor needs and wants, and that's in there too, which I think gives a good background before you even get started to write. It also includes some evaluation work that the Smithsonian has done on its visitors, and it might give you an idea that maybe in your institution you want to do some evaluation work too, to really find out more about your audience. I always think that's a good idea. The next section, the interpretive writing tips, well, this is the meat or the guts of the matter. Most of the guide is on these 21 tips that we've identified. And you'll hear about some of our favorite tips in just a moment. But what I wanted to mention here was that the thing I like about these writing tips, besides describing each one that we've come to agree on, is that we give examples of them in labels. So you can see what this really looks like in an actual label. And especially like the ones where we have the before and the after, where you might see something that was written at first, just to get the content out there, but hadn't really been phrased for your visitor. And then using the tips, you can then see how this label turned into something very interpretive and good for the gallery. Now, you might already have, maybe you're a writer who does this stuff and thinking, and all these things already. So maybe it's just a good review or like a checklist. But what if you're not doing this already in your museum? So this next section is really how to get your museum on board, so that you might be the only champion, and how do you get others to come along with you? So what we show in this chapter or section are some perspectives, and we give 5 different perspectives from the Smithsonian units. There's one from the American Indian, one from natural history, one from the Freer Gallery of Art, one from American history, and one from the Air and Space Museum. There are different techniques of how each of us in our units have come to bring these ideas to fruition. So you could come and maybe look at one strategy, take a little bit from this, a little bit from that. I know that I've actually used some of the ones that, besides the ones that we use at Air and Space, I've actually used some of the other ones that I've learned as we put these things together. So I think it's really, really helpful. The last thing I want to mention, I won't go too much into, is the resource page at the end. And I like that one because it has hyperlinks, which is always good. But what it really does is highlight some other guides that are out there. Like we said, this is not the only one. This is not the last word. There's so many good guides. And what's in this list, we've tried to put some other guides. So if you want to go deeper and learn more about it, you can really do that through these resources. So that's what I want to tell you about what's in it. Now, I guess, Leslie, we're going to hear from you. What is your favorite tip?
So my favorite tip is number 19, use inclusive language. And that means using language that makes all visitors feel welcome and respected. So I love this tip, and here's why. Language is power. And I want us to sit with that for a second. When we use the written word, especially when we use the written word from the platform of a museum, we have the ability to open the doors or close the doors based on how we arrange characters on a page and characters on a wall. The way that we put words together tells our audiences whether they're welcome and they're a part of this and they're meant to engage with this, or they're not. So why not open the doors? Why not open the doors to as broad an audience as possible, and do that through using inclusive language? And that's why I'm so grateful that this guide has really good guidance for how to do that. I'm also grateful that this guide is upfront about disagreement in this arena, because language is always changing. And that's about more than the singular they, even though I'm not going to lie, the singular they has been around for a while. It's been around for so long. I've seen the TH expressed with a thorn. That's another story for another day. The thing is, communities are always evolving, and they're regularly changing the way that they feel most comfortable defining themselves. So we share fantastic resources in this guide, in that back section of additional guides that Judy was talking about. Things like the diversity style guide that are keeping up with all of those changes. And there's the Smithsonian guidelines for accessible design as well, that has some good guidance about how to talk about people with disabilities. You can see the graphic that I have here was released by the UN that talks about how to use gender neutral language. There are a lot of fantastic resources out there, and a lot of the best resources are authored by the communities that have the identity and also have the language expertise and want to let writers and editors know, like, hey, language is changing, but here's what we're doing right now, and here's the best way to talk about us that invites us. But the one thing that all of these guides in the field of inclusive language do agree about, which makes this kind of moving target seem a little bit more manageable. The one thing they do agree about is respecting personal preference. Because at the end of the day, it really is as simple as that. You know, open the door to your audiences by talking about them the way they want to be talked about. So that's my tip. And if we move to the next slide, we'll have Angela's favorite multiple tips.
I couldn't choose just one. So my favorite tips are the ones at the very beginning, which is called getting started. And these are 4 tips that I feel are essential for any exhibition team to discuss and to agree upon early in the process. Like the earlier the better, like before you actually start writing words on a page, having some of these conversations. So the first 4 tips are, the first one is creating content pathways for a variety of visitors, like knowing that you've got some visitors who are going to, browse, some visitors who are going to do the sprint through the exhibition, and some who are going to read every single label. And so if you can create a label hierarchy, both in terms of the types of information you put in there, but also this is where you work with your designer. So graphically, they have different ways that these different parts look is helpful. Also, setting standards for label lengths. So this is going to be highly dependent upon your museum and your visitors, your target audiences, how visitors behave at your museum. But having a conversation early in the process, so you're like, okay, these labels are going to be 10 words. These labels are going to be 50 words. These labels are going to be 75 words. Like I will tell you, at natural history, 100 words is a long label for us and our visitors. Like we try very hard not to go a bit beyond that. Other museums, it's going to be very different because of who your audience is, but you need to have these conversations early. Also, identifying your museum's voice and identifying the exhibition's tone. So, when we talk about voice, the museum's voice, again, your museum may have a blanket voice of how they talk about certain things, words they use, words they never use, the kind of brand, I hate to use the word brand, but the kind of brand that your museum has, that's your voice. But then your individual exhibitions may have different tones. So, you may have an exhibit that's on climate change and social justice. You may not want to have like a cheeky tone. Whereas if you have an exhibit that is more, geared toward like a different, maybe a younger audience, you may have a very different tone. The key is to have these conversations early. And so the graphic that I've put in here is just one page of a vision board that we did for an exhibit where we said, we want some of our labels to be provocative. Now, if I say that in a team meeting, every single person around that table is going to have a different idea of what that means and a different, different reactions. Ooh, provocative, yes. Edgy, or ooh, provocative, no, we can't do that. So what we did was we went around and we looked at what are some of the labels out there that or not just labels, but writing in general, that we thought were provocative in the way that we wanted this exhibit to be. And so we put some examples on there, and we put some definitions around what we meant by that, so that the team as a whole could take a look at the ideas and the examples and go, yes, we're good with that, or no, we are not good with that at all. But again, having those conversations from the very beginning, it just saves you a whole lot of heartache towards the end. And with that, I will pass over to Judy and her favorite tip.
Thanks, Angela. So yeah, my favorite tip is write for reading aloud. And you know, when I finish writing something, I will look at it and either edit it or give it to an editor and actually say it out loud. And what you want to hear is you want to hear it sound like something you would say to the person next to you. And if it does, that's good, because that means it's conversational. That's what we're aiming for here. It also, right, when you read out loud, you want to make sure that you're not using a really long sentence that's convoluted, that's hard to follow. So using short sentences, and oops, that's another tip, but I stuck it in here anyway. So yeah, using short sentences, having a conversational, that's really, those are really good tips for interpretive writing. And the reason why that's so good is because, you know, when you have a visitor group come into your museum, the chances are it's you know, if it's a family group, which many of museums have family groups, there's going to be one person who reads the labels to others in the group. Maybe because those other people, you know, don't want to read, they can't read, or whatever, and or aren't interested, you know, like that little boy we saw in the cartoon. But if somebody else is reading the label to you, you want to make it sound natural and conversational. So there's one more thing I want to say about reading, writing your labels for reading out loud, and that is really, it's a benefit for the visitor because it can make that reader sound really, really smart. And I want to give a little example of that with this graphic that I'm showing here. This is a graphic from the Bronx Zoo in New York. And by the way, this graphic, it has a lot of different tips on here. I'm just going to point them out real quickly before I get into my story. It's good because it has chunks, little chunks of words, not long paragraphs. So each one stands on its own. So if you don't want to read the whole thing, you read one thing and you get something out of it. It asks questions. And not only does it ask questions, but then it immediately answers those questions. I mean, there might be times where you ask open-ended questions to have people think about things. But if you're going to ask a specific detailed question, you probably want to give the answer right then and there. The other thing that's good, this is obviously a zoo where the object is the animal. And so a lot of this label is talking about the object. So you have to look at it. And it's really nice to bring those things together in your label. But anyway, so this is actually an old graphic. And the story I want to say is long before I even thought about working in a museum, when I was in college and I went to the zoo with some friends, I was all excited because I love the zoo and I love the animals. And I saw the giraffes and I ran up ahead of them and I start reading the label right in the center about the neck. And I read it. And then when my friends caught up to me, I turned to them and I paraphrased and I said, wow, you know, giraffes have really long necks, but they only have 7 neck bones, the same that we do. It's just that their bones are so much bigger. And so my friends looked at each other and they said, gee whiz, you seem to know a lot about giraffes. But what they didn't know was that I just read the label. So yeah, write for reading aloud can really help you. I think that was about all we were going to say, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to put this this back up so that people could get that URL, especially the one that's in the middle there. Get that URL so that they could download the guide for themselves. And I mean, please download it, read it, send us a note about what you thought of it. Use it, let us know how it works for you and your teams. We definitely want the feedback and we definitely want this to be used. And with that, I think we're doing discussion and questions and answers. So I will stop screen share and turn it over to Leslie.
Great, thanks so much. We're happy to take any questions that you might have. Feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat to let us know what questions you have, what thoughts you have about the guide and about the presentation. And also thanks to the nearly 90 folks who have come out to join us for this presentation, and the lively chat that's going on. I've really enjoyed following along with y'all. So we're happy to talk about interpretive writing. So give us what you got. Oh, we have one question. Do your teams work with outside focus groups from different audiences to test the text? Angela, how does that work at Natural History?
So we haven't really worked with like outside focus groups per se, but yes, we do. Like for right now, let me back up. So youth and teen audiences are a new target audience for natural history. And so we're working on an exhibit that will be coming out next year on cell phones, and we're working on a couple of other exhibits where the target audience is this teen and young adult audience. So yes, we are doing a lot of focus groups, advisory groups with our teen volunteers and our interns. We also have been doing some surveys. Before COVID, we were doing some surveys in the galleries where we were talking to the higher teens and young adults, and then we also have done some surveys with those audiences as well. So whenever we have questions about, is this working for this particular audience, yeah, going to your audiences, going to your visitors is a great idea.
I could add something to that real quick. So yeah, I mean, we don't, I guess similar, we don't have focus groups per se, but if your museum has, we work with the educators in our museum who have a very close tie to teachers. And so the teachers often will come in for workshops and such, and that's a perfect time for us to try out things with them. So our educators work closely with some of our teachers to do that kind of work. So even if you don't have a particular focus groups set up, you can try to look for ways within your museum and make use of stuff that you've already got going.
Oh, there's another interesting question in the chat about one of the sections that we devoted a whole section of the guide to it. And someone would like us to talk more about getting the director and academic curators on board. I'll give that one to Angela first.
Oh, no. I was gonna turn that over to you and Judy, because yeah, I mean, at our museum, we are, natural history about 20 years ago shifted from our curatorial, our scientific staff writing labels to having an on-staff exhibit writer. Now, I have not been at the museum that long, so I was not part of that transition. But I will not tell you that there are a lot of conversations throughout the development process about what our who our audiences is, and sometimes that really surprises our scientific staff when we tell them, it's like, these are our audience, this is how long they stay in the museum, this is how long they stay in an exhibit, a big exhibit versus a small exhibit, and that usually just blows their mind. They're like, wait, what? Just
Right.
oh, we have in the past taken some of them out to do visitor visitor interviews with us, so that they can kind of see how visitors are reacting to things, and that also, I know, can really shift perspectives of the different kinds of label writing that we do. And it's a continuing conversation. It's every word is a negotiation with the team, and you win some and you lose some. But I think from the very beginning, stating, here are the best practices, and it's not the type of writing that they are used to. I think starting at the very beginning is very helpful in that case.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Angela said about about taking your directors through the museum and having them look at stuff with fresh eyes. For us at Air and Space, when we were kind of set up to do that in an easy way. We are going through a transformation of redoing every single one of our 20 galleries plus as part of also the whole renovation of the building. And at that same time, we got a new director. So it was kind of good for us because we could take the director through and show her what was there and how the exhibits were working. And as in one exhibit in particular, I remember, I wasn't on this, but I remember hearing about it, that we were walking her through one of our galleries that had a lot of good science information in it, but it was too much. It was, old style, book on the wall type of stuff. And so that came through to her right away. And so we had an immediate advocate, which was wonderful. But, so I guess in that way we were lucky because it came from that, the top down, do this, make it interpretive, make it engaging, make it compelling for audiences, to bring in audiences who might not be here, who might not have been coming before. That's one of our big charters too. We want to draw in a larger and more diverse audience into our museum. So we have to reach out and find out where these people are, meet the visitor where they are. So I would say if you can, manage somebody in your group or somebody higher up to take a director through and just say, listen, just imagine yourself as a visitor, walk through with fresh eyes and see what this place really looks like.
Just real quick, another thing that you can, oh, sorry. I was gonna say another thing you can do is show the AAM has their annual label writing competition and they post all their winners on their website. So sometimes you can pull up some of those and say, here are some examples that the field says are, good examples as well.
I was going to say there's a related question in the chat, and thank you, April, for your kind words. She asks, any suggestions related to working with content/review team members who add hundreds of words to labels and struggle to recognize the importance of short sentences and brevity? Oh, we've never had any experience with that. Actually, I'm going to be greedy. I want to take this question. There is this concept called situational literacy. So what I do is I try to relate it to this structure, because this is something that our content review team might have some experience with, is that your ability to engage with text and take in text is entirely dependent upon your emotional and physical surroundings. Say like you're in a doctor's office and the doctor is giving you some news. You're kind of like, I think I follow all of the words that are going on here, but I'm in a heightened emotional state in an unfamiliar situation. And as such, I'm not actually picking up what he's laying down. It's similar in a museum setting. You're like, I'm not familiar with the surroundings. The light is dim. I'm standing up, so my back hurts. If these are visitors to Washington, D.C., their feet definitely hurt because they've been walking. You might have a family group with you. What are they doing? Are they bored? Are they all around you? Where are we going to eat? I'm hungry. Where's the bathroom? There's all of this stuff going on. This is so different from any other format that you might be engaging with a reader in, that there's all this stuff going on. So you really have to be deliberate with grabbing the attention and doing it in a shorter number of words.
I want to add one thing, Leslie, that, what you said resonates so much with me. And I'll say that at Air and Space, as we are redoing all of our galleries at the same time, we are hiring contract writers. Because I don't know if you heard before, I'm the only writer in the museum, so I couldn't do it all. But anyway, so we're doing contract writers. And the good news about that is that they know nothing about our content. And so the challenge does become, like you say, trying to get the writer to understand what the content is about. And so the writers will ask questions, and keep asking, well, what do you mean by that? And what do you mean by that? And drilling down, down, down. And so sometimes I think we kind of wear down the curators to the point where they say, okay, yeah, make it simple. This is what you need. But, it's not, it's actually just bringing to the forefront what we need to do for our visitors.
Oh, here's another interesting question we've got. Who or which team should be responsible for writing the content and then subsequently editing label content? And I'd love to hand this to Angela and then to Judy, because I know that there are different models at both of your museums.
You want to go first, or should I go?
I don't know there's a should. The reason that I moved to natural history was because of the writing model that they used, the development model that they used, where a writer was integral to the process from the very beginning. So one could say, hey, we don't need a writer until we, have the messages and we have an outline and we're just going to write the labels. And I mean, yeah, sure. But I actually prefer to be in there from the very beginning, because what I can do is I can help the team to really craft the messages and get them as concise and concrete as possible. I can, help with thinking about, like, not just the words for a particular individual label, but like, how is it going to be overall? How are we going? What's our philosophy going to be in terms of tone and voice and all of that? So frankly, I think that having a person in there who is either a writer or an editor or some type of, works with like communications with visitors in there from the beginning is the way I like to do it, is essential. Now, I know that not every museum does that. But I think that it helps because for us, then that way, the curator is not personally invested in the individual words that are on the label. They are invested in making sure that the content is communicated accurately. And I think that's the best place for them to be. Now, other museums, like I said, other museums, even within the Smithsonian, do it differently. And I know that, like, American Indian, they don't have exhibit writers. They have their exhibit developer who also works with the curator to write the script. So it's more of a collaboration that way. Leslie, I know in American history, you all do it different. And Judy, I know you guys do it different as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of like what you said, Angela, and that's how I like to work too. And that might be because, I got my start in writing labels through the Smithsonian, but not at Air and Space where I am now, but at the National Zoo. And so I think the answer to the question of like who should do all these things really depends on, well, it depends on a lot of things, but ultimately for us at the zoo, it depended on how much staff there was. And, before when I said, this guide was for everybody and anybody, from the writer to the reviewer, to the editor, to the reviewer, to the approver. Well, in some small places, that might be one and the same person, and at the National Zoo, that's kind of how it was. The curators there were the animal experts, and they gave their information. They would look it over, but they weren't. They were more concerned about taking care of the animals. And then we also had the science arm, and they were really more interested in doing their publications. If we had a question, we would go to them to get clarification. But really, all that stuff rested in the exhibits department. So it was a shock to me when I went to Air and Space and I saw, oh, this is a whole different model here. And that model is, I think, probably more typical of most museums that have these larger units, larger divisions, where the curators are the ones who know all that stuff. And they are the ones who are familiar with the information and know how to get it, know what needs to be said. What is not always true is that these curators are not always developed in interpretive writing. And so that's what we're talking about. We're not saying that you have to get an outside writer if the curator can change the writing style. But if you're in a situation of transition, which Aaron Space has been in for a few years, it might just be easier to start off with that interpretive writer, that person who already has that ability to write in that way. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now in our transformation. The curators, they are the content experts. There's no question about it. They start everything off with what we call the content document, and they put everything out there. Now, what we, the exhibit department, then goes back and says, that's not all going to fit. So you need to prioritize. So then, it's a back and forth, and this goes on for some time. And then we bring in the writer who will then do the writing. Now, I kind of think that Angela's way of having that person there, that writer, all the way through is probably the best way to do it, but sometimes it doesn't work that way. And it just means it might take a little longer to catch everybody up along the way. So I think there are lots of models out there. The important thing to remember is that we are all in it together on one team to get the best product.
To jump in on that, I think that the way the question was phrased, writing the content, and I think that it's separate. That writing is this skill that many folks can have. In interpretive writing is certainly a skill many folks can have. That person doesn't necessarily need to be a trained writer and editor. But the thing is, on these museum teams, we're all specialists, and we all have different interests that we're really good at serving. That an exhibit developer or a writer editor may have a skill set for expressing content in a short and engaging ways. An historian or a curator has that subject matter expertise. Everybody has their piece of it that they're bringing to the table. What's the most important thing is to create a forum where all of those different voices can come together, because it's everybody, again, like I said before, nobody comes to work wanting to do a bad job. It really is, for me, about creating an atmosphere where people get to sit around a table and do their best work. In the guide, I talk about the model that, one of the models that we use in American history is what we've been calling a meet and edit, where we bring a whole team together. And what we used to this has been one telework blessing, because before this era of hybrid work and telework, we used to roll a projector into my office and project the script onto the wall. And we would all sit around looking at the words, shuffling things around, talking about where I'd say, nope, that is beyond an 8th grade comprehension level. We probably shouldn't be using that word. And then I could make an adjustment, and then a subject matter expert could say, well, actually, there's a nuance there that's missing because of this. And we could all get together and do our best work and represent our the best interests in our in exercising our specialty. It's been really convenient during telework, because you could do that now on Teams and on Zoom with a screen share and have the Word document right there. I personally, I like it as a model. I think it's really effective. There's another question that we have. How do you get reviewers to give you feedback instead of being copy editors? I could tell by the laughs here, we've got some good answers. I'm going to give the cheap answer. Export to PDF. Nobody is going to take the time to put a sticky note to say, move this comma here, this sentence needs to be ...
Yeah, that's a good strategy. I think I'm going to have to try that one, Leslie. I'll have to say that we just take everybody's comment however it comes and do the best we can with it. And, if there are too many edits rather than commenting on something, then you just have to be strong enough to go back and talk to that person about it. But really, I think most of the times that I've seen that happen, they're usually very good edits, and so we will accept them.
Yeah, you know, we know that we have people who get into the weeds of copy editing. So when we send them the script, we are very specific, like, this is the kind of feedback we want. We do not want this kind of feedback. We're going to get that feedback.
Yeah, we get it.
But the other thing is, you know, then you have to look at, like, within your museum, within your institution, like, well, do you have to take every edit? You know, and we don't have to take every edit. We have to respond to most of them. But, you know, I've got some folks who are still working with, you know, early to mid 20th century grammar rules and style that, no, we're not doing that anymore. You know, just, you know, and so it just, again, conversations. But I think that Leslie's solution of putting it in a PDF, we've done that with a few projects, and that has helped. So.
I don't hate it though, because I've had it before where a script goes out to review and the reviewer catches me on a typo, and I'll send cookies. I'm like, please, like, thank you so much.
Yep.
Probably got time for one more question. How does the process vary for digital text for online exhibitions?
It's a good question. I don't know. So maybe somebody else has an answer to that one.
I think in many ways our process is the same in terms of you know, in terms of like developing and editing and reviewing. I think interpretive writing for exhibits it's not the same as in web-based or digital exhibits, but there are many similarities. I mean, you're still dealing with you know, people and their short attention span, although they may be, you know, getting to sit down instead of standing with a bunch of people around them. My biggest concern with digital is that it doesn't become the dumping ground of all the content that you didn't put in the exhibit. So that's something that my curators and my team are really familiar with me saying when they're like, oh, we can put that on the web. And I'm like, no, it cannot be a dumping ground. So if you're going to put whatever you're going to put in a digital, has to be just as thought out and has to be just as engaging for visitors.
And to that point, that, you know, how do you think out good digital content? There are some great studies out there. I know Pointer has some good ones. Nielsen has a recent study that came out as well, that are eye tracking studies that actually monitor where people's eyes are moving when they're reading text online, and it gives great information about how to you know, optimize digital text so that folks are actually going to read it and engage with it and get something out of it. So I just want to, you know, certainly highlight that, and folks in the chat are highlighting it too. The web is not a dumping ground. Well, I think we're running out of time, even though I could probably talk a whole lot longer about this topic. But I really do hope that folks keep the conversation going. Check that guide. Our email addresses are there. We're, you know, I think I definitely speak for everybody on this call. We're so happy to answer those questions and to be a resource.
Well, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, Judy, for your insight on a very, very practical process. And I hope that our audience was able to learn more, and I hope that they will be able to reach out to you with any questions, maybe suggestions, things like that. And at this time, I'm just going to thank our audience for participating and let them know that we have some additional sessions coming up shortly after this one. And again, thank you, everyone. Feel free to fill out the survey. I think 5s or 10s all across the board for our speakers. and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everyone.